So let's have a quick listen. What would it be like if I reduce the amount of negative incoming CV on the resonance? What would we get? So now what we will hear is what this voice sounds like with the resonance cranked up all the time. It's very, very subtle. If we bring in a lot of the negative CV, it really pushes the resonance down as the Krell function generator rises, and we hardly notice it. But essentially, that's what we want. What we want to have is maximum control over a tiny, tiny little aspect of the patch. And that's the beauty of modular, is that you can find a whole universe of sounds in some tiny little knob changes, as Todd Barton likes to say. So then being able to voltage control that becomes a huge benefit for us. Now you might also notice that as the voice fades in and fades out, you hear a little bit of vibrato. So I'm running vibrato from the Hertz donut in LFO mode into a VCA on the bottom of the double Andori, using that same inverted Krell function into that VCA, so that the vibrato is loudest. Its effect is greatest when the Krell function is lowest, and we're not really hearing the voice do anything. And then as the voice fades in, the vibrato fades out, and it tends to give it a very focused kind of sound, like a wind instrument or a string instrument, where an instrumentalist is fishing for a note, or adding some vibrato and then holding it once they're happy with where that pitch is. Tends to give it a very intense kind of movement to it. And the other aspect is the incoming gain. So like I said earlier, I come out of the oscillator and then I go right into a VCA, so I've got control over how much I'm driving the Polaris low-pass filter. And as most of you will know, the harder that you drive your resonant filter, the less the resonance is going to be its own little sine wave riding on top. So if I back off, it takes on a more flute-like sound. Of course, it gets quieter. And then as I bring it up, you can really hear it start to push the filter in the wavefolder. So a lot of work can go into tuning one of these voices, but what I find is that once I get it right, and I've really found that sweet spot, I know that I've reached that point when the voice begins to take on its own special characteristic, and it sounds like it's one fully formed musical instrument and not just a bunch of parts. So it doesn't just sound like someone pressing a key and then an envelope and, you know, an oscillator into a filter or something that's kind of real synthy sounding, but it has more of that kind of organic whole instrument tone. It becomes very, very expressive. Now on our scope, what we're looking at is two outputted voltages. The red voltage is the trace from our newly set up Krell function, so it's very similar to what we started with. We're running two triangle oscillators into a rise and fall of a function generator so that that's continuously changing the end of fall from or end of cycle from that function generator, then triggers our sample and hold. And then the green trace that you see is the actual audio output from the whole signal chain, which is why it's so full. So that's essentially a rectified version of that audio output. And then just to be able to change things up a little bit, I added in one little extra. Typically in these Krell patches, every single time that the Krell function restarts, every time it hits its endpoint, it'll go and it'll grab a different note. And so if it's running very fast, it'll go and grab a note for each one of those very fast blips. If it's running slowly, it'll hold a note for that whole rise and fall. But you can change that. You can pick different points in the Krell function to try to grab notes from it. And there's some complicated ways to do it, say using something like a comparator that grabs some point, some voltage threshold along its range, and then outputs a trigger that'll grab more pitches. Or the simplest way to do it is to simply employ the end of rise function. So if you have a function generator that'll give you both an end of fall and an end of rise from one envelope, then it can become very, very useful. So I've already set that up by pressing a little button off screen here. I can set it so that at the top of the Krell function, at the top of the red waveform, before it turns around, it's going to grab a second random note from our diatonic scale that's being output by the U scale. Remember to like and subscribe. Please consider joining my Patreon to help me make more videos. And we will continue in the next episode as we take a look at our new function generator. I encourage you to pop some comments in the video if you can guess what function generator I'm using to create these Krell functions. But we're going to take a look at it and see all the different shapes that we can get out of it. And then we're going to start to take a look at how we begin to pull polyphony out of a system like this and then create a whole piece of work from it. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.